I'm David Ruffin, and these are the Temptations.
Before we begin, if you want to see music bios or more good videos like this, hit the subscribe button. And without further ado, on to our feature presentation. Young Otis attends a concert with his friend Al Bryant. Otis is starstruck, and it was at this moment that he wanted to become a singer. He gets permed up, and his mother likes it, but his father doesn't, as he wants his son to start working for the assembly line. Otis threatens to run away, but settles down and tells his father that this is his dream and is not going to change that for anybody. He and Al forms a group, and while they sound good, they don't have that oomph that'll take them to the next level. They'll get that oomph from bass singer Melvin Franklin, or Blue. Otis tries to approach him, but Blue fears for his life and runs. But Otis catches him and recruits him to join his group. Blue agrees, but Otis has to get approval from his mother, Mama Rose Franklin, portrayed by the legendary actress Jennifer Lewis. While singing one day, Otis catches the eye on Josephine and offers her to go out on a Saturday night. During their smooch fest, a radio jockey orders Otis and his group to come down to the radio station. Once there, the jockey, played by Kid from Kid and Play, tells the group that he doesn't need them, but instead Johnny Mae Matthew does. She's been spying on the group and saw potential in them. They agree to record for her, but she changes the name to Otis Williams in the distance. The group records the song Come On with Al singing lead, and here's we have the first era of the movie. In reality, future Temptation Richard Street sang the lead. At a showcase, they run into Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams, who call themselves the Primes, with Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, and Diane Ross, who are known as the Primettes, and this leaves us with another error. While the Primettes rehearse with the Primes, they never perform with them as depicted in this scene. While the Distants are on stage, Paul and Eddie praises their performance, but notice their lack of stage presence. After their performance, they track down Berry Gordy in the bathroom. Gordy gives them his business card and offers them to audition for Motown Records. After the show, the Distants get a harsh lesson on the record industry from their manager Johnny Mae. They found out that the performers get paid last after everyone else does. This leads the group losing their trust with Johnny Mae and the members quitting, but Otis and Melvin vowed to stick together no matter what. Days go by and Melvin tells Otis that Eddie and Paul want to join their group, and we have another error, albeit a misunderstanding. In reality, once the members of the band quit, Otis called Eddie to join. Eddie agrees to join on the condition Paul joins too. Once they recruit Al to join again, they have a solid formation. Paul gives them a lesson in stage presence.
1, 2, 3, and snap, snap. You got it like 1, 2, 3, snap. Oh, mama.
Once the group get it together, they are ready to audition for Motown. They run into Jimmy Ruffin and his little brother David Ruffin and tells the Distants that they changed their name to the Elgins.
Elgins? Like the wristwatch?
Yeah.
But when Otis tells Motown's secretary named Martha Reeves the name of the group, they receive an order to wait outside and come up with a new name. They come up with some good names and some not so good names.
Spectacles. Testicles. Probably not. Yeah. Sorry.
They end up settling with the Temptations, finally audition for Motown, and earn them a spot with Motown Records. The celebration is short-lived for Paul and Otis, as this new path have more importance as Otis and Joe are expecting a child. During this film, we learn about Motown's hit-making process. First comes the vocal lessons and the coaching, then comes the recording, the choreography is followed, and finally, the panel filled with songwriters, producers, and other important people around the industry will rate the song off its hit potential. Sadly, most of the Temptations' earlier hits wouldn't crack the top 100. Now I want to pause this review because they had a hit on the table. Berry Gordy written a song for the Temptations he knew could be a hit. That song would be called Do You Love Me? However, Gordy was unable to get a hold of the Temps that day because it was said that they were at a gospel concert. So Gordy gave the song to the Contours, who had their own slow hit potential. Do You Love Me crossed over and became a top 5 hit on the pop charts. What if the Temptations sang that song? I bet their story will be told in a different light. New Year's 1964, the group performed at a Motown New Year's party, and for once things go well. But when approached to do an encore, Al disagrees, even as if everyone else does. He cracks Paul's head with a bottle and is promptly fired from the group. The remaining four perform Shout, and the Ruffin brothers, especially David, steals the show. Afterwards, he gets invited for dinner with the group, and David expresses desires to join the group. The Temptations accept this, and upon hearing this, Smokey comes in and tells them that he wrote a song with the hope that they could finally break through with. The song was called The Way You Do the Things You Do, which became the boys' first charting single. They would go on the Motown Review tour, but we get a harsh lesson on performing in the segregated South. While changing a bus tire, they get harassed by racist white people and David wants all the smoke. Touring then causes a strain on Otis's marriage, as Josephine believes Otis is having an affair on the road. One day before another performance, Smokey writes a song, this time for David Ruffin. The song will be called My Girl, one of the greatest songs man ever made. They performed the song at a show similar to the Ed Sullivan Show, and the film shows Al Bryant, who is now a drunk and will later die from cirrhosis of the liver, and Johnny May, knowing she blew a major opportunity. My Girl goes number 1, and the boys receive $12,500, which is about $120,000 apiece in 2023. Each boys get new whip, with Otis also buying one for his parents, and David got 2 rides a limousine with a chauffeur. Success could really change a person, and for David, he develops an ego. Otis and Melvin confronts David missing meetings and rehearsals because of his cocaine addiction. David then goes off as he says he doesn't need to rehearse and tells Otis that he's the main attraction of the group and that he's just a guy hating in the shadows.
They coming to see me.
They coming to see the Temptations.
Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis.
Otis doesn't make any changes for now, but what changed was their management. Berry Gordy started to make plans to have the Temptation become more of a crossover act, so he hires Shelley Berger to manage them and the Supremes. The Temps seem eager about the new changes, but Paul is hesitant that they could alienate their original.
He's gonna put a lot of money in this project.
Oh, Corn, it ain't about the money. I mean, look, our music, that's who we are. Look, do you really think that the jocks are gonna actually get behind a bunch of sellouts?
A few months later, the band performs at the predominantly white crowd at the Copacabana, but David is late. He later makes a grandiose entrance, asserting his dominance in the group.
I'm David Ruffin, and these are the Temptations.
Otis had had enough and wants David out of the group. Eddie's also start to think that Otis is player hating and wants Ruff to stay. It all comes down to Melvin, who is indecisive. But whatever the case was, David was fired from the.
So now what?
You're gonna cry in the car.
Part 2 of this miniseries began back in Detroit, set to perform a concert with the new member Dennis Edwards, formerly of the Contours. After killing it on Cloud 9, Dennis was set to sing Ain't Too Proud to Beg. In comes David Ruffin to steal his show. After he gets done with the performance, David runs off backstage and Otis wants to go 12 rounds with them. Otis tells Ruffin that things are going great for the group and his negativity isn't needed. Eddie tells Otis that he's making a big mistake letting David Ruffin walk, but Melvin lets him know that the group is equal and not one man is bigger or lesser.
Ain't no one man bigger than this group. Now you remember that.
Months go by and the Temptations are now Grammy winners. Paul's drinking problem is becoming more public and he gets kicked out of the party after singing For Once in My Life. Josephine tells Otis that they're getting a divorce and Melvin is now battling arthritis. The doctors tell Melvin that if he doubles up on shots, he wouldn't have to worry about arthritis, but what he doesn't know is that by doing this, he'll become prone to future infections. Paul is now struggling to perform, and Otis wants Richard Street to fill in. Eddie disagrees with the move, as he feels Otis is pushing Paul out of the group. Eddie goes to David Ruffin for some advice on how to go about this. Ruff tells Eddie that Paul is going to be gone, and he'll be next, so his best option is to quit before he gets fired. But before Eddie sets off with his plan, they record Just My Imagination, and Paul had a comeback, but not enough for him to stay in the group. After an onstage performance, Eddie Kendricks walks off stage, quitting the Temptations. Otis then visits Paul to update his health. Paul tells Otis that everything is good, but Otis still sees signs that he isn't ready. It's 1972, and the Temps are about to record Papa Was a Rolling Stone. But Dennis refused to record the song because his daddy died on the 3rd of September. Even though his dad died on October 3rd, and was more upset at the song's content about deadbeat fathers, which none of the Temptations were. During the scene, we are shown montages of David, Eddie, and especially Paul. But in the second verse, we get another error. Dennis is singing the second verse after Melvin's part, which in reality, again, Richard Street is singing it. Otis must have a vendetta against Richard because he tried to silence his history. During the montage, Paul has reached new lows and can't take life anymore. He decides to do the only thing and take himself out the game. Eddie reunites with Melvin at the gravesite, and Melvin tells Eddie that regardless of what happens, they'll always be family. In 1977, the Temps moved to Los Angeles and their success had declined. Hits haven't been coming in, and Otis and Melvin feel like they're ready to leave Motown and fire their manager, Shelley. They signed with Atlantic Records. One day, Melvin was helping a woman with her groceries when a man decides to carjack Melvin's car. He is shot in the leg. At the hospital, Otis wants to cancel the group's upcoming European tour, but Melvin tells him to go anyway for financial reasons. After the tour, Otis decides to rest in Detroit and visit his mother. In an emotional encounter, she thanks Otis for everything he has given her. 1980 brings good news and bad news for the Temptations. The good news is that Melvin has fully recovered from his gunshot wound, but the bad news is that the Temptations lost their deal with Atlantic. One day, Eddie spots David in the audience and brings him on stage to perform You're My Everything. After that, Eddie and David team up with Dennis and start touring, even though they do this in 1989, not in 1980. The Temptations announced they have returned to Motown and rehired Shelley as their manager. Not long after, someone brought up an idea of a reunion album. Eddie's enthused about the opportunity, but David is less than enthused. At the first rehearsals, David, who had a knack of being late or not showing up at all, was one of the first ones there. Otis and Melvin feel like David has changed. The tour starts off strong and a bond was present. In the middle of the tour, Melvin gets a phone call from Otis's ex, Josephine, informing him that his son Lamont died from a construction fall. After this, the tour goes downhill. Shelley informs Otis that David is back to being David, and upon hearing this, Eddie gets tired of Otis bad-mouthing and Eddie walks off.
The third time, Shelley?
Yeah, I know. No, he's doing this on purpose. He knows we get paid based on all 7 temps being there. Promoters were afraid.
Desperate for drugs, David sells his Lincoln. In 1989, the Temptation members David, Eddie, Otis, Melvin, Dennis, and posthumously Paul are inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Despite their past animosity, the members call truce on stage. 2 years later, a body was dumped at the Philadelphia hospital and was identified as John Doe in the morgue, turned out to be David Ruffin. And there's another error involving this scene, but because the circumstances involving David Ruffin's death is messy, we will not discuss it here. In 1995, Otis visits Mama Rose Franklin for a special dinner, and we learn that Melvin Franklin is now confined to a wheelchair. Mama Rose, Otis, and Melvin reminisce about the late members Eddie, who died of lung cancer in 1992, Paul, and David. Melvin tells Otis that he has no regrets about the past, and while Melvin gets the short ribs out of the oven, Mama Rose thanks Otis for keeping the group together, especially when things got tough. Mama and Otis calls out Melvin's name to no response. He died in his mother's kitchen. Even in reality, Blue died in Los Angeles from a brain seizure. The movie satirized this because Melvin's death was still recent and the family was still grieving. The real Smokey Robinson performs Really Gonna Miss You at his funeral, and the film ends with the Classic Five performing My Girl.
Temptations forever.
I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I want to credit to Ron Brooks, Christian Payton, and the actor who played Dennis for using their vocals for the movie. But I must say the best performance in this movie is hands down is Leon. He played that part. To this day I call him David Ruffin because how good he played it. Now one of my big critiques I have for this film is all the inaccuracies, but come on, what biopic got it right? I also felt like some of the casting were off. Like, even though they only appeared in one scene, I didn't like the casting of the Supremes. Outside of Flo, they got it wrong. Also, I felt like DB Woodside looked more like Otis than Charles Malik Whitfield. But don't let these small critiques hinder you from watching this movie. If you haven't watched this movie, I highly recommend it. As a matter of fact, this movie is free with ads on YouTube, so after this video, go watch it on YouTube. And on that note, I'm going to end the video right here. Tell me what y'all think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.